Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Borough Briefing with Westminster City Council. I'm Peter Murray, Curator-in-Chief at NLA, London's network for the built environment. And our Borough Briefing series provides a platform for local authorities to talk about some of the key issues affecting communities and neighbourhoods, creating a forum for promoting future plans of areas undergoing change and providing valuable insights into the borough's priorities. And so Westminster join us today to update us on plans on reinventing the Oxford Street district, bringing us up to speed with policies in the newly adopted city plan for 2019 to 2049, as well as an update on the draft new strategy to widen participation and promote early engagement in the planning process for local communities. So as usual, before we start, I'd just like to remind you that there will be a chance to ask our speakers some questions at the end. So please do post your question using the Q&A button on your screen. And I'm very pleased to welcome Michael Clarkson, who's the City Planning Policy Team Leader, who's going to tell us all about the new city plan. Michael.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, so the Westminster City Plan was adopted on the 21st of April this year. It's been in development for some years, got that over the line through the Planning Inspectorate, and I'd also like to talk a little bit about our environmental supplementary planning document that we've just launched this week for public consultation for 6 weeks until the end of June. So next slide, please. The first chapter in the city plan is the council's spatial strategy. So there's a high-level policy number 1 there that sets out various growth areas and the key priorities in the plan as a whole. And then the next 5 policies break down the key areas of change in the city over the plan period. So we've got the WERLSPA, which is the West End Retail Leisure Special Policy Area, and the Tottenham Court Road Opportunity Area in Policy 2. So that takes the job targets and home targets from the London plan, talks about the Oxford Street district a little bit, and talks about diversifying nighttime economy, freight and servicing, and public realm. Then the next 2 policies are our other opportunity areas at Paddington and Victoria. So again, there's homes and jobs targets set there, and policies talk about the key priorities, including public realm, sustainable travel, and include new and flexible workspaces, etc. Then number 5 is the Northwest Economic Development Area that covers the northwest part of Westminster, trying to safeguard and deliver new employment floor space there, diversifying its housing mix, and reducing the severance caused by the Westway flyover and the canals, etc., with other areas. And then we have our housing renewal areas where we expect to see significant housing growth at Church Street / Edgware Road and Ebury Bridge. Again, some high housing targets there, but also improvements to community facilities, etc. And some new jobs as well, hopefully. And then the final policy in that chapter is our neighbourly development principles, which is a general policy covering protection of local amenity, local environment, quality, local character, and greening measures, etc. So quite a general one there. We have the next slide, please. Next chapter is housing. So that first policy there, number 8, sets the housing target for the plan period, which is over 20,000 new homes. There's a clause on maximum size of new homes to optimize sites delivering new housing. So no new homes to be over 200 square meters, and it protects losses of existing housing. Then we set out our affordable housing target aligned to the London plan approach, making a clear preference for on-site delivery, and our 10-year split there now being 60-40 in favour of intermediate housing. Then we have policies on specialist housing, innovative housing models, and housing quality, including external and internal space standards. Next slide, please. The economy chapter covers economic growth encouraging new office floor space for 63,000 new jobs, encouraging co-working spaces, affordable workspace provision, and preventing losses of offices as far as we can. Then the next policy, town centres, high streets and the central activities zone, discusses intensification and diversification of our retail offer, and encouraging active uses and public serving uses there, and sets out how each of our kind of types of centres in our retail hierarchy will evolve. And it does respond to the introduction of the new Class E, so it's probably one of the first plans in London to do that. The next policy is on visitor economy. That covers arts and cultural uses, public realm, events, hotels and conference facilities. The next one on food and drink and entertainment, that's about trying to prevent over concentrations of those in certain areas of the city, also protecting pubs, and also has a policy clause on use of premises for shisha smoking. Community infrastructure is about supporting new premises where it's needed and encouraging co-location of facilities, as well as preventing loss of existing facilities. Then we have education and skills, which is supporting expansion of schools and higher education facilities. It also requires contributions from developers to improve local employment prospects for residents through our Westminster Employment Service. Digital infrastructure, that's encouraging new digital and communications infrastructure to be embedded into building design and co-location of those facilities where possible. And then at the bottom on there's a few policies on distinct areas in Westminster, trying to protect their local character and their land uses as far as we can do through planning policy. So Soho, Mayfair, St James's, Harley Street and Savile Row. Next one, please. The connections chapter, which is primarily about transport, but is talking about encouraging active travel as much as possible. It's aligned to the London Plan's Healthy Streets approach, creating high quality pedestrian friendly public realm, improving accessibility, wayfinding, connecting up cycle routes and ensuring better access and cycle parking provision, improving accessibility to public transport, parking policy, which is now aligned with the London Plan approach as well, and all new parking spaces that are provided should have active electric charging provision, helping our rollout of the electric charging points. 28 is about accessing highway and resisting the loss of highway land to and narrowing pavements, etc., and ensuring that street clutter doesn't happen. And then we support, obviously, freight consolidation across the city as far as we can. It's a key issue going forward for us, and requirements for developers to meet their delivery and servicing needs on site. And then the next one, encouraging technological innovation, again, to increase mobility, reduce congestion and improve air quality through transport changes. And the last one there is about encouraging water-related uses where they're impacting on waterways and water bodies and addressing their location, and also covers piers and moorings on the Thames. Next, please. The environment chapter, which I'll come on to in more detail, covers a range of topics there. We want major development to be at least air quality neutral, and in our opportunity areas we want them to show how they've taken a positive approach to air quality in the wider area. The local environmental impacts, it covers light pollution, noise, odour, contamination, construction impacts. Green infrastructure, trying to encourage developments to incorporate greening measures as far as possible, also covers protection of open spaces, including their tranquility. Requires new open space and play space to be provided in major development, and also protects biodiversity and sites of nature conservation importance. Flood risk is more specific about site by site when flood risk assessments will be required, etc. And then the energy policy covers the London Plan energy hierarchy and has a requirement for all major development to be net zero carbon and connect to heat networks wherever possible. And the last one, waste on circular talks about circular economy statements being provided, requirements for waste storage in individual developments, etc. Next one, please. This is the last chapter in the plan, which is design and heritage. General policy and principles of design responding to Westminster's context. Heritage, all about conserving and enhancing our heritage assets, including the World Heritage Site and its management. 40 is about townscape and integrating extensive development with their surroundings, and also covers things like alterations and roof extensions, etc. Building height, we take a contextual approach, so we're looking at the wider context in which a tall building would sit. It sets out some general principles of how tall buildings will be assessed and some specific locations where tall buildings are likely to come forward. The next one's specifically about the heights in our housing renewal areas, which might change slightly given the need for high levels of affordable housing to be delivered. Our public realm policy sets principles of having a safe, attractive, clutter-free public realm, improving connectivity, legibility and permeability. Also covers public art, outdoor seating and signage, etc. Next one is security measures, which is basically about appropriate counter-terrorism measures and ensuring safe and secure public spaces. And the last one is our basements policy, which is a little more restrictive than we have been in the past with this, trying to ensure that they're generally only 1 story deep and only cover 50% underneath garden land where that is the case. Next, please. I'll quickly move on to the environment SPD. So the council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and this is our first step in considering how the built environment can combat climate change. As I said earlier, it's out for consultation. Gives a bit more detail on that environment chapter I covered just now in the city plan, and also brings together some of our other guidance. Next, please. So the air quality section, as I say, requires an air quality positive approach in opportunity areas and housing renewal areas, sets out where air quality assessments are required, and also gives examples of appropriate mitigations. So that could be managing the energy demand of the building, use of green infrastructure or electric vehicle charging points, for example, to improve local air quality. Next, please. Local environmental impacts, again, as I said, as the city plan policy covers those range of different issues. So it brings together some previously informal guidance that we had, which will give it more weight in the statutory decision-making process once the SPD is fully adopted. We're also undertaking a review of our code of construction practice. Next, please. Our green infrastructure section sets out a range of different greening measures that could be used in Westminster, and also uses the Wild West End functional value matrix, which shows how different measures can improve biodiversity, climate, well-being and social indicators as an alternative to the London Plan's urban greening factor. And also gives some details on tree assessments, planting, management plans, and the requirement in the plan for biodiversity net gain. Next, please. Yeah, the flood risk section gives a summary of our strategic flood risk assessment and surface water management plan, some nice planning acronyms. Also advises on different types of sustainable drainage systems that might be appropriate in Westminster, such as rainwater harvesting, permeable paving, or green and blue roofs. And also talks a bit about the statutory tests of sequential exceptions tests and when flood risk assessments are required site by site. Next one, please. Energy, so goes into a bit more detail on what we mean by net zero carbon, explains the energy hierarchy, which is be lean, be clean, be green, and be seen. If you can read that in more detail, obviously in the document. And encourages a whole life carbon approach for all major developments to be undertaken. Then the next one, please, is the waste section. So that talks about explains the waste hierarchy and the concept of the circular economy and when circular economy statements are required. So that's about retention, refurbishment and retrofitting options, and integrates waste storage into the design of buildings and sets out when management plans are required for major developments. And the last slide, please, is a section about retrofitting and sustainable design. So obviously Westminster has a lot of heritage assets, and there's sometimes a tension between retrofitting historic buildings, etc. So this section sets out how you would assess retrofitting opportunities depending on the type of asset. Also sets out where the BREEAM environmental assessment methodology is required. And as it says there's several different retrofitting opportunities that might be suitable. So there's a matrix in there that shows how each of those will be able to affect different types of heritage assets. So listed buildings, conservation areas, etc. Talks a bit about the likelihood of their acceptability and the types of permissions that would be needed to carry out those measures. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. And now Oliver Gibson, who's the Principal Development Planning Officer, will now update us on the Council's strategy for early community engagement in the planning system. So, Oliver, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. So the Council is in the process of developing a guidance document, an informal guidance document on early community engagement. It forms part of the Council's wider efforts to update both adopted and informal planning guidance across a range of different subjects. As I said, the informal guidance is at a draft stage, but the aim of the finalised document is for it to positively influence the quality and consistency of community engagement undertaken by developers across the city in future years. And we believe it's likely to be a unique level of guidance and insight for developers into a council's expectations, certainly within London, when it's complete. In drawing up the draft guidance notes, we've obviously done research prior to the drafting process, and that leads us to the conclusion that there are generally good standards of early engagement carried out by many developers. The issue really is that it tends to be patchy in terms of where that quality occurs. There's certainly an issue in terms of when the engagement occurs, whether it occurs early enough to genuinely allow communities to have a meaningful input into the design of schemes. And certainly the best practitioners generally, but not obviously across the board, are those with a longer term interest in the community. So in Westminster, that's typically the great estates, etc. And I'm sure many people have noticed the good work that Grosvenor have done over recent years around their building trust analysis back in 2019, and more recently their positive space in practice guidance, which I think is recently published and provides developer side public engagement advice, and that's something we're looking to mirror, obviously, with a Westminster context in our document. But as I say, overall the picture is one of a lack of consistency in terms of the quality of engagement undertaking, the timing of that engagement critically, and the techniques that are used. So the issues that we're trying to address are issues that local communities and members have raised with us over recent years, and too often pre-application engagement, as I've said, is scheduled too late in the process. The views of participants are consequently not critically reviewed and used to enhance schemes. Engagement can therefore seem unresponsive to those that are engaged, and it appears that the views of the local community haven't been taken on board. And too often the consultation also fails to reach less often heard from groups within local communities. So that's something we're looking to address as well, and I'll come back to that. Another issue that is beneficial to officers is that currently we struggle to see the views of local communities because we're not involved in the process at pre-application stage, other than with direct conversations with developers, and that leads to a disconnect which has problems for us in terms of providing advice that's consistent both with policy and the local community expectations. And what I'm sure people have found is that can contribute to delay and additional cost at application stage for applicants, where we try to knit that that back together when members support the views of the community. So the aims are to give communities a greater opportunity to share their unique insights on the places in which they live or work with developers, ensure that the engagement is inclusive, as I said earlier, leading to more representative opinions, facilitate a more informed and positive conversation with developers. So rather than have a one-off hit of engagement, to have a multi-phased engagement on projects of certainly a larger scale, to reduce conflict and build mutual trust. That's going back to the point that Grosvenor identified back in 2019 about the lack of trust, not only in developers, but in the planning process more generally. And we feel that through that process, this will deliver development that's designed to be more responsive to local need, and we feel consequently more resilient to future changes in local behaviour and demand, which, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, are significant at the current time. So how are we going to do that? So we're updating the Council Statement of Community Involvement, and that is scheduled to be completed by the end of 2021 at the current time. And we're introducing the new guidance that I'm talking to you today about. The informal guidance seeks to achieve the following, which is to make the Council's pre-application engagement expectations of developers much clearer and transparent to all stakeholders, promote best practice early engagement methods, particularly with a focus on the promotion of the really good digital methods that can, where they're used in tandem with traditional methods, are a significant enhancement of the engagement process. Provide developers with those methodologies and necessary contacts indeed to try and avoid excluding traditionally less often heard from groups within the community. Introduce a more structured pre-application process so we have more consistency across the engagement that occurs in the city, and to ensure that the engagement occurs earlier in the scheme development process, as I've said already, and ensure that the views of the community are reviewed, amended and used to enhance emerging schemes. And that really, along with feedback, will address that last point about ensuring that the communities feel listened to. This is an extract from the document. I won't go into it in detail, but you can have a look at the document after this session. I think the slides will be shared. Effectively, what happens at the moment, we find, is the engagement process occurs here immediately prior to the submission of a formal application. And what we're trying to achieve through the informal guidance is to shift that expectation forward to ensure that engagement with the community occurs in tandem with engaging officers on emerging schemes, or ideally before that. So progress so far: we produced the initial draft in the first part of the year, consulted with amenity societies, neighbourhood forums and other community groups, as well as the Westminster Property Association, WPA, in March. That consultation period closed in April, and we're now in the process of amending and refining the guidance in light of the feedback we received. And that feedback was excellent and really useful, and I hope will push the document to be even better than it was originally. So the main principles of the guidance to deliver a more meaningful and transparent and inclusive approach were supported by all respondents across the developer and community sectors. There was recognition from all groups that the digital methods that they become engaged in over the last year or so, or even before that, were significantly helpful in terms of increasing engagement. And all groups recognised, as I said at the start, there were good examples already of community engagement. I'll just skip through these. The residents groups want to see more focus on where there was a neighbourhood forum, and that's understandable. They'd like to see it applied to non-major developments, so we're reviewing that. That's certainly an issue that we recognise, that there are significant impacts from smaller developments, sometimes more so than the major development. And they'd like to see, as we've said already, an enhanced focus on following up and feeding back from engagement that's already occurred. The business improvement districts bids wanted us to recognise there's legitimate circumstances where early engagement may not be appropriate prior to engagement with officers, and we recognise that, and that's something we'll take on board. And they rightly pointed out to us that we should focus on other groups such as youth groups, employees and workers, etc. So that they're all going to be incorporated into the second draft that we'll consult on later this year. And the WPA, this is a very snatched view of their what I think are their best suggestions. There's a much wider response they gave, and we're grateful for that. They suggested a pilot on emerging guidance, and we're certainly looking at that, and there's potentially opportunities to do that. Want us to avoid introducing rigid barriers, and that's absolutely not what we want to do. This is about providing informal guidance, not reinventing the wheel, promoting best practice that already exists in the marketplace. And they wanted us to look again at the need for external facilitators, and that's something we'll do as we go into the next phase of producing a second version of the document. So what are the next steps? As I say, we're in that phase in May 2021 at the moment. We're finalising the revised version of the guidance in light of the feedback we just looked at. Further consultation at this stage is scheduled to occur in June, with the publication of the finalised version of the guidance, again, at this stage in July of this year. And that forms part of the wider review, as I said at the beginning, of the Statement of Community Involvement, which is a more lengthy process, and will be consulted on later this year, with the expectation at this stage that we'll update that by the end of this year. As I say, there's a link at the end of the presentation to the first iteration of the guidance, should anybody want to look at it when the slides are circulated after the session. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Oliver. And of course, the Oxford Street District, great flagship regeneration project. And we're going to now go to Brendan Harper, who's place shaping coordinator, who's going to tell us all about that. Brendan.
Great. Thank you, Peter. So Oxford Street probably doesn't need much of an introduction to this audience, but just for clarification, we're talking about the street from Marble Arch to Tottenham Court Road, as well as the the streets immediately north and south of that, so taking in parts of Marylebone, Mayfair, Soho and Fitzrovia. And this next slide is probably how many of us remember it. Pre-pandemic, it was the nation's high street, significant contributor to both London and the wider UK's economy. But it was underperforming for some time. We knew the quality of the public realm was poor. It's poor air quality, traffic congestion, the pedestrian environment didn't add up to a very nice visitor experience. Plus, for a while now, we've had this pressure of Crossrail imminently arriving and bringing us 60 million more pedestrians a year into already quite congested pedestrian environment. Of course, there's been the long-term trends in retail as well that are coming forward and making it a bit more challenging for the district. And the council and partners were bringing forward plans to respond to these challenges. And then, of course, the pandemic happens last year and into this year, which has only accelerated those trends that we were seeing for retail, adding a lot more challenges, really increasing the need for investment, evolution and reinvention of the district. So towards the end of last year, we revisited our plans, developed a new vision and a delivery plan for the district. It's all built around this vision, creating a greener, smarter future together. And this links very closely to the council's corporate plan, City for All. And this was launched back in January this year, setting out our plans and the vision around addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis, improving air quality, making this district or using data and technology to manage the city better, deliver improved experiences and create a smart city. We've also got plans around building a thriving economy, responding to those retail challenges that we mentioned, diversifying the economy, growing the nighttime economy particularly, and doing this in a way with our communities and stakeholders that's inclusive and helps us deliver vibrant communities. So this is the kind of framework within our vision document. It sets out the strategy that Oxford Street District is. Oxford Street is the spine of this district, the anchor for the surrounding neighbourhoods, and connects 3 very distinct centres within the district. So Marble Arch in the west, Oxford Circus in the middle, and then Oxford Street East towards Tottenham Court Road. These are all very distinct areas that provide different experiences, different mixes of uses. And we're working with landowners and other stakeholders in each of these areas to develop holistic kind of area-wide approaches, join up not just public realm, but private development, economic and cultural uses of each of these spaces. We've also looked at the wider kind of networks and the connections. We've got some fantastic garden squares in the Oxford Street District. We're looking at how we can connect the district to the park and to the wider environment of the West End. It's collectively, this framework document, which has been out since January, and is available on our website, is the new basis for the interventions that we're bringing forward for the district. So I just want to give a bit of an update on how we're progressing on that. Just go to the next slide. Great. So we've had this on the ground for a few weeks now. We've started on the interim public realm scheme for Oxford Street, which is transforming the street from what you can see here to something much more like this. We're reducing the traffic dominance, providing more space for people, adding greenery, supporting the vibrancy of the area, supporting the reopening of the economy after the pandemic, making this a more desirable place for Londoners particularly to come back and rediscover. And these plans, as I said, are interim. They're signalling our intention for the long term, supporting the recovery from the pandemic while we finalise and deliver the long-term permanent schemes there. We've also launched, this is just an image of some of the footway widening which has occurred recently, and the greenery, the planting that is coming imminently. We've launched new branding and messaging for the district, which you'll see in banners and empty shop fronts along Oxford Street, and there's a program of engaging pop-ups and pop-up uses and cultural installations and shop fronts that will be coming forward shortly, as a kind of interim measure while we rebuild the district, gather that inward investment that we need. Another one of the temporary projects we're bringing forward is at Marble Arch. This is one of the 3 centres I mentioned earlier. Obviously, this used to be quite a grand public place. It was originally part of Hyde Park. It linked Oxford Street directly to the park in the past, and now is being severed by what is dozens of lanes of traffic. So we're bringing forward radical temporary intervention here, which I guess signals the intention to reconnect the city and park, extend the park into Marble Arch area, lift it, and build this temporary mountain, which we're hoping will help attract people back to the district. It's something that's definitely received a lot of feedback and comment online, which is what we're aiming for, get people thinking about the district being more than retail, more than what they used to think it was. So this will provide a visitor experience where people can climb the mountain, get views of Hyde Park, which is something that's not easily available to the public at the moment. And then they can descend internally within the mountain. We've got this cavernous space in there that will be delivering cultural interventions. So that'll be opening in July if the lockdown if everything goes to Boris's plan, hopefully that'll be good timing for the reopening of the economy. We're also bringing forward smart elements of our strategy. We're working with BT in particular to launch an app that will serve a potential multitude of uses around wayfinding, active travel, and cultural activation. So we'll have more than half a dozen sites throughout the district that will provide augmented reality experiences, enable people to engage with the history and the culture of the district, and engage around the future as well. And we're exploring ways in how we can develop this app further to incentivize active travel and further exploration of the district. I just want to kind of finish on some of one of the permanent public realm schemes that we've started recently. This is a really exciting project to turn what was previously some very unloved streets behind Oxford Circus and the Palladium into the Soho Photography Quarter. This view here is a few weeks ago. It was taken on Oxford Street looking into Soho. This street used to be quite a dark, dreary place. It was known for antisocial behaviour. It wasn't particularly well managed. And so we've been working with the Photographers Gallery, which is located there on Ramillies Street, to bring their gallery outdoors, using the buildings, the public realm as a canvas for their exhibitions. So there'll be art friezes, on the buildings. There'll be projections, live projections onto buildings, which will, as I say, bring the gallery outdoors, really enliven that space. And we're improving the entire public realm, providing flush surfaces, adding more greenery, improving the lighting, which we hope will give people a reason, to not only to move through the space, and use it as the connection between Oxford Street and Soho that it is, but also to stop and use it as a place to rest, respite from the busyness of Oxford Street. Stop and stay, improve access and awareness of the Photographers Gallery itself. So this is one of a number of kind of what we're calling laneway projects that we're bringing forward to improve the permeability between Oxford Street and the surrounding neighbourhoods, really make these underutilised spaces work better for the district and the local communities. And we think this demonstrates our vision for a greener, smarter, more inclusive use of space that will benefit everyone. So on that note, I'll hand back to Peter.
Great, thank you very much, Brendan. And so now we've got a chance for a bit of a panel discussion with the speakers. So please do put your questions in the Q&A panel if you have them. But before we do that, I'm just going to chat to Deirdre Armsby, who's Director of Place Shaping and Town Planning at Westminster, and wanted to find out from her really what she's up to at the moment. Deirdre.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much to the NLA and Peter for enabling us to showcase some parts of the enormous amount of things that we're doing in the city at the moment. I think obviously we've all had quite a trying time over the last 14 months, perhaps parts of our borough more particularly than other parts of London, with the West End and the loss of tourism and workers. And we're starting to see that climb back out. We've done some things to try and encourage people to get back here safely and do what they need to do in this great city. And, we've been very successful with that, with our alfresco interventions and a range of other things. And I think my colleagues, Brendan, Oliver and Michael, have given you a bit of a flavour of some of the things we've worked on in terms of strategic ambition and vision for a greener, more contemporary city, and also that we've done things tactically as the rollout of some of the interventions around Oxford Street demonstrate. So I think we're very much trying to move ourselves into looking to the future, being confident about the future that we can have at our fingertips if we continue to innovate, be ambitious, and have that strong vision at the heart, and there's a guiding principle of everything we do. So, you know, we have a huge range of people and audiences to satisfy here, from, you know, hardcore business objectives in terms of how they use the borough, all the way through and with our communities who, you know, we're very lucky. We have very expert communities who involve themselves in our work. And I think, you know, the early community engagement stuff is about recognition of that, and that at stages where things are a bit more fluid, people can get involved and actually really influence. And I think that's then borne out in some of our more tactically focused projects, such as Oxford Street, which is, you know, again, another example of how we want to do something big and a huge transformational intervention, but we have to take our audience, our users and future users, we have to predict their needs and bring all that together to make sure that we do the best we possibly can with the resources that are available, and you know, in a rather uncertain world. But I think, you know, the city plan and the Oxford Street and the early engagement illustrates how we're operating on all those fronts to try to progress the borough.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. I know that the local plan is a long-term plan, but we were hearing figures like 63,000 new jobs, 16 million more pedestrians in Oxford Street. So you're confident that the sort of stories about the demise of the centre of cities and so on is that's just a temporary thing, and we will be back on track in the not distant future?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, I think perhaps the trajectory of some of those ambitions may take a bit of a move off of some linear course, which probably never would have adhered to anyway. But, you know, I think we're all used to, especially in London boroughs, many of the development cycles, you know, being cyclical, and this is a sudden cycle, but we've had sudden cycles before. And I think, though, now there is you know, a much more eclectic and broad view of the debates that go to inform how do we deal with the situation we're in right now. But we as a council, and many of the people in our borough as long-term landowners and businesses, you know, we do all have a big stake in a medium and long-term future. And we're starting to move out of how we've dealt with our immediate crisis, but there is, across all those different groups, including residents, you know, really a very firm confidence that the assets that we have, if we look after them and if you like, modify them or make them more contemporary to the needs that have been drawn up from the pandemic. And I think there's some more acute and intense demands around the quality of environment, you know, green spaces, you know, how attached people are to their local areas. And for some people, the West End is their neighbourhood. So, you know, we've got to try harder and harder to balance all of those things. But yeah, I would say that the confidence is good.
Good. Well, talking about neighbourhoods, we have our first question. They don't give their name, but they ask, on parking, will Westminster be progressing genuinely car-free development like other boroughs, i.e. preventing people who move into new homes from getting parking permits for on-street parking? My understanding is that residents often oppose much needed housing on the basis of parking strain caused by on-street parking by new residents. Who would like to have a go at that one?
Is Michael on?
Yes, Michael's there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Michael, do you want to have a first go? I'm happy to chip in, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, obviously we've been on a bit of a journey with our parking policy through the development of the city plan. So we have fully aligned now to the mayor's approach in the London plan, and that will mean that in most cases, because of the public transport accessibility levels, there won't be any off-site parking provided apart from disabled spaces. So that's our next step really is the issue of permits, because obviously we do still operate a permit and a zone system in Westminster. So that's a conversation we'll be kicking off with our members over the course of this year to kind of get to grips with that problem and tackle it. Because yeah, there's obviously issues with resident permits continuing to be issued. So we're looking at reforming that to make it work, because there will be pressures of on-street parking. We do carry out a kind of a stress survey every year or so to check the levels of parking stress. So we'll have to look carefully at that data as well as we go through our reform of that process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Sorry, Peter, could I just add that people may consider, I don't know, I'm making an assumption from that question that this is a particular problem from Westminster, but in my experience, it's a problem all over London. And I think, you know, some of the reactions to the low traffic neighbourhoods that we've seen in recent months it demonstrate that very ably. So it's a problem for lots of us, and we're all obviously in a transition about how we move away from our physical spaces being dominated by cars, in particular private cars, and how we shift it over to more equitable and more pleasant ways of using the finite space that we have at our disposal.
Great, thank you very much. And now we've got a question from James Felstead, who says, given the impact of the last year and the likely long-term impact on the retail industry, do you think that there is any merit in revisiting the proposal to pedestrianise Oxford Street? This would have the potential to fundamentally reposition this key retail destination and underpins a huge section of the economy. And then the next question also is relevant to Oxford Street District, and this is, if it's a success, is there the chance of the hill becoming permanent?
Yeah, some great questions there. So on the pedestrianisation element, our permanent plans that we'll bring forward with partners will significantly improve the environment for pedestrians while retaining access for the vehicles that need to be on Oxford Street, including a number of bus routes that are key for accessibility and timed access for essential freight and servicing activity. But the physical environment will definitely swing, in favour of pedestrians, and any kind of restrictions we put in place in terms of access will ensure that those essential journeys can happen at times that the businesses and residents need those journeys, and reducing the conflict with peak pedestrian hours. And then in terms of the hill, no, it has definitely, it is a temporary intervention. It does signal our long-term intention to improve the area significantly, reconnect it as far as possible with Hyde Park, but it is a temporary intervention to reimagine the space, start the conversation around, or continue the conversation around that area, because partners, the Portman estate in the last few years have brought forward some really exciting plans for that area that we'll be continuing to work with them and others to develop. But there's a TfL red route through there, and essential kind of cross London movements go through that area, which we're not going to be able to eliminate.
Could you put a speed limit on buses going, so they could just coast gently down Oxford Street rather than putting their foot down?
Yeah, we work closely with TfL, it's particularly TfL buses, and recently Westminster's become a 20-mile-per-hour borough. It's not often vehicles get close to that on Oxford Street, but we work closely with TfL and ensure that the changes we make will to the street will help improve bus journey times and the reliability of bus journey times. And we work with them on safety and all of other elements.
But there are other major streets around the world which have tram systems which go at about 10 mph, which is gives a very different feel, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You don't think TfL would agree to that?
As part of the conversations that are on the same page as us in terms of wanting to improve the pedestrian environment, reduce conflict between vehicles, buses, and other road users.
Okay, so now we've got a question from Francesco Ferrari for Michael. Could you give a bit more insight on the policy with regards to net zero carbon and whole life assessment? You used the word encourage for implementing LCA rather than require in terms of NZC. What will be the policy in terms of calculating offset to zero or a percentage of that? Will offset payments be required by Westminster for new developments? If so, what is the policy defining in terms of cost?
I'll try my best.
There's a lot of questions there.
Yeah, so on zero carbon, the SPD gives a little bit more detail on this. So we're using the Green Building Council's framework definition. So that's both a definition both at construction stage and operational stage of the building. So we're looking for basically developments to achieve both of those wherever possible. But it should be, both operationally for the building's end use and during the construction phase. But have a look at the SPD document for more detail on that. In terms of the carbon offsetting, obviously the London plans just raised the base price for calculating those, and at the moment we'll be undertaking calculations on that basis, but we are looking to potentially go further. We'll obviously have to do some testing and gather some more data, but we are working on a planning obligations supplementary planning document as well, which we hope to consult on later this year, and that will include more detail on that carbon offsetting process, and we'll see if we can go further than that London plan definition. And on the embodied whole life carbon side, yes, so I think the London plan policy on that requires developments that are referable to the mayor to take this whole life carbon approach. So those size of developments will definitely have to do that in Westminster. Our planning policy doesn't go quite as far as requiring major developments, so other major developments to do that, but we definitely want to encourage that as best practice. And there's, again, more detail in the SPD about how people can achieve those standards.
Okay, thank you very much. And now this is one for Oliver. Joshua Garfield of Commonplace has asked, how has digital engagement shaped the plans for Westminster's future? And I'd like to add a question, that is, how do you avoid the sort of hijacking of digital methods by lobby groups, which as happens with quite a lot of social media these days?
That's a really good question, isn't it? Certainly the supplementary point. In terms of how has it shaped plans for Westminster's future, I don't know if the question is aimed at whether we're using digital methods in the way in which we look at things like the Oxford Street district, but in terms of our guidance,
your future plans, there are future plans for more digital engagement. I think that was the question. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in terms of what we're looking to enhance in the guidance that we're in the process of producing, it's setting out for developers where we think it's a useful tool. I think in pre-application discussions, it's absolutely part of the mix now. I think probably in almost all schemes that come forward, certainly major schemes. I think it probably needs to be part of a mix of methods using traditional face-to-face engagement, where that comes back to being something that can be reasonably carried out, hopefully post the pandemic. Going on to your question, that's certainly something we have concerns about, the way in which using social media can be manipulated to target certain groups, and part of the text within the initial version, and certainly that will stay in an edited form in the second version that we consult on shortly, tries to deal with this issue in terms of asking developers to set out in their statement of community involvement and any information they provide to us at a pre-application stage, what parameters they've set where they've used social media or methods such as that, where they have the ability to target certain groups.
Yes, Deirdre. Yeah.
Peter, yeah, on that, just carrying on from that point, I think, you know, the whole planning and sort of regeneration system and trying to engage communities and sort of co-design things, which is very much where we're at. We actually, you know, we've got a very long history of that level of participation. And actually, we do have to accept that there will be some hijacking in some circumstances, because, for example, we're not here to judge the motivations of anyone who participates in anything we do. We have no traction to do that within the planning system at all. So we just have to take the points that are made. But having said that, you know, we obviously do have systems in place that deal with the very extreme ends of those sorts of things, but sometimes the uncomfortable debates are the uncomfortable debates, and we have to have them. I think the other point in Josh's question around how, if you like, are our future plans for engagement being influenced by the digital? I mean, we just did our first hybrid planning committee last week, so that is a model, if you like, which beds in the digital and is very much where we hope to be continuing to be in the future. It's not that we will, you know, shift from that as a sort of an interregnum. It's very much acknowledging that digital absolutely provides much better accessibility for many parts of the community, and we do not want to lose that. So it will absolutely be a very dominant part of all our future plans.
Very good. Yes, and well, the government new proposals also expect that to happen, don't they? So
they do.
So we're nearly up to time. 2 quick questions. Will there be any roads for e-scooters in Westminster Council? And what are the cycling route plans for the area? By the area, I presume that means Oxford Street District. So can you answer both those, Brendan?
Can do, yeah. We're engaging with TfL and the trial that they're leading on e-scooters. So let's say watch this space. And the cycle routes through Oxford Street, yeah, we've got parallel routes to Oxford Street itself, so north and south. You know, we're planning those routes so that people, you need to cycle through the area. You know, we can reduce the conflict with the pedestrian heavy Oxford Street, and we're also looking. We'll also be increasing cycle parking significantly, including, you know, providing more secure cycle parking.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. We are on time now, so I'll draw things to a close. And but in the meantime, I mean, if there are any other boroughs watching, if you'd like to do a briefing with us, because this is a great way to get, as you've heard, really, you know, good detailed information out to a wider audience, please do get in touch. And if you really want to find out more about London boroughs, we do have our Opportunity London report, which looks at what all different London boroughs are doing in their development and growth programs. And now, just before I thank the speakers, I'd just like to tell the audience that there is going to be a short poll coming up onto the screen in a moment, and we'd be very glad if you could just fill that in, because it helps us make sure that we're doing all the right things as far as our program is concerned. And my apologies to some of those questioners that we didn't manage to get to, but thank you very much to our speakers for giving us such a detailed and interesting introduction to the Westminster of the future. Thank you.